Hi, it's Taryn. Welcome back to the Blind Homemaker. Today we are making super soft sandwich bread from scratch. I think a must-have staple in your house is knowing how to make a quick sandwich bread from scratch. And a lot of people think it's very overwhelming, but it's not. I'm here to tell you. So here I have in this bowl is the equivalent of 1 packet of active dry yeast. This is just a yeasted bread. It's not sourdough. It's very simple. And to that, we are going to add 1.5 cups of milk mixed with 2 tablespoons of honey and 2 tablespoons of butter. You can heat that up in the microwave just to combine everything together, but I use a milk steamer. I'm just gonna add that straight to the yeast. I love this milk steamer. My husband, if I can get the lid on, my husband and I got it from a thrift shop. It's so cute. It's like cream and ceramic, and you just stick it right on your stove and you can steam your milk. I think it's really made for like hot chocolate or something like that, but I use it for this all the time. So what we're doing is and I'm just stirring this up in the bottom of my bowl. And what we're doing is activating the yeast. I keep my yeast, I buy it in like a pound brick and I keep it in my freezer. So the milk and the honey will help wake that yeast up. You want the temperature of your milk to be warm to the touch, but not hot. That's very important because if it's hot, you will kill your yeast. You can also substitute milk for water. You can substitute the honey for sugar, and you can substitute the butter for oil. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make my bread with fresh milled flour. You do not have to do that. I'll tell you what you need to change though if you are using fresh milled flour. So I'm going to go ahead and grind my grain. I am going to be using hard red wheat. All right, let's go. All right, there we go. I ground my flour and we are just going to be waiting for this mixture to get kind of foamy. It doesn't take very long. Now, if you're using freshly ground flour, the typical recipe calls for roughly 4 to 5 cups of all-purpose flour. If you're using freshly ground flour, you are going to need a 1/4 cup extra per cup. So if you use 4 cups of flour for all-purpose, you're going to need 5 cups of fresh ground. And I like to use a hard wheat because it has more gluten content, and that's what you need for a bread that's going to rise. The other consideration I'm going to make is I'm going to grab an egg and I'm going to put it in with my yeast and my milk. The egg with freshly milled flour helps just make it a softer loaf. You can also use sunflower lecithin. I've never tried that before. I just know that you can. So I'm going to grab an egg. Can you grab me an egg from over there?
Are we out of eggs?
We're out of eggs from the fridge.
Oh, Lord. Well,
we're in an egg crisis.
I don't know how long these eggs have been sitting.
Oh no, they're fine because they still have the.
Okay.
We're gonna use a fresh egg, but because these are fresh, I have to wash them. So I'm gonna wash it real quick. It's hard having an egg crisis in the winter when your chickens aren't laying very well. So egg goes in. And I'm just gonna grab a fork and zhuzh that up really well. And I did get a paper plate to put my eggshell on. Y'all know I love a trash bowl or a trash plate to keep all your garbage in one area. Okay. Now that our egg is in there, and just remember, you are only going to use the egg if you're using freshly ground flour. So I am going to teach you how to do this bread without a stand mixer. I do usually use my stand mixer, but it's not something that's accessible to everyone. So we're just going to do all of this by hand. And you're gonna add roughly about, I would say 2 cups of flour at first, and add a little bit at a time. The amount of flour that you're going to use is extremely variable. It depends on how humid it is where you live, and it depends on how hydrated your flour is. So just remember, you can always add more, but you can never take out. And I'm just going to use a big spoon to start off with to combine my flour. And as the flour hydrates with the milk and the honey and the butter, it is going to start to come together. And you know what? We can't forget this. We're gonna add a 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I have this Redmond's real salt, and I love it so much. It's got all of its natural minerals in it, and I buy it by like the 10-pound bag. And I think salt is one of those things that is crucial to stock up on. Make sure you have a good amount, because without salt, food just does not taste good. You can have some struggle meals, but if you don't have enough salt, struggle meals just don't work well. And you just never know what may happen in life. And salt is one of those things that may be good for bartering. Salt and coffee. Make sure you always have a bunch. Even if you don't drink coffee, just make sure you have it. So my dough is coming together a little bit. With the fresh ground flour, it does take some time to rehydrate. So my dough is still pretty sticky, but it is starting to come together. So I may just let this sit for a few minutes, but if you are using all-purpose flour from the store, you don't really need to do that. Add a little bit more of my flour. This will start to just feel very second nature, where you don't have to think through it very much. And it really only takes a couple of times of making bread to feel that. So I am ditching my spoon at this point and just using my hands. Adding a little bit of flour at a time. We don't go through too much bread, but I know people who are bread lovers or have lots of children. They make a loaf of bread a day, and they just get into the habit of doing their little daily bread loaf. And I think that's so nice. And I don't know about y'all, but I find comfort in simple routines like that. So you're gonna have your bread come into a shaggy dough, which means it's not all one consistency all the way through, but it's not super sticky and it's fully holding together. And that's what you want. At this point, we are going to pull the dough out of the bowl, put my bowl to the side, and I'm going to flour my work surface, and we are going to do the best part, and that is kneading the dough. So I'm just getting the extra little bits of dough off of my hands. I don't have any rings or anything on right now. So when you are kneading dough, you want to have it into a ball and use your palms, press your palms into the dough, push away from your body, lift up, and then pull the dough back towards you and create it into a ball again. And you're just pressing away and pulling back, pulling the edges in all around the sides. You may, as you work, have to add a little bit more flour. Push away from your body, roll it back in. And we are going to do this kneading. You could do it with 2 hands or 1 hand. I kind of alternate in between each hand. So I'm pressing the heel of my hand into my dough, rolling it back towards me. So mine's sticking to my counter a tiny bit, so I'm gonna add a little bit more flour to my work surface. And we are going to continue this process for 10 minutes. If you are using a stand mixer with a dough hook, you would just want it to knead for 5 to 7 minutes. So that's what I'm gonna do here. I like at this point to listen to a podcast or a book, just think about my day. It's nice to have your hands doing something sensory. It feels really good. And this is just going to make one regular size bread loaf. And as you're kneading, you will start noticing that the bread is becoming, your dough is becoming all one texture, and that's what you want. You don't want lumps of anything throughout your dough. And also as you're kneading, you may need a little bit more flour here and there. And your dough is going to start to feel kind of elastic. So you should be able to pull up on it and it stretch. My dough is still pretty tight at this point. It's not stretching super well, which means we have not activated the gluten well enough. So that's why we knead the dough. It helps to activate the gluten. And that's what makes your bread rise. So you need a flour that has a gluten content to make this rise. Sourdough is a whole different animal, and I could do a video about that at another point. I figured I would just start with the yeast bread because that's what I started with. And I feel like it's very simple. A lot of people feel overwhelmed by bread making, and it's just not that deep. Like I say all the time, 9 times out of 10 when you are cooking, you will end up with something that's at least edible. If your bread comes out really dense, you can make a French bread casserole out of it. Not French bread, French toast casserole out of it. You could pretty much always make breadcrumbs. So don't feel nervous about giving something a try, because usually you will have something edible when push comes to shove. And now my dough is feeling really nice and elastic, so I could pull it and stretch it. It's feeling nice and elastic, and it's come together in a nice, smooth ball. I'm only gonna knead it for just a smidge bit longer. And what we're going to do at this point is we are going to put this dough ball in a bowl, a greased bowl, or I may just honestly pop it back into the same bowl. Just add a little bit of like melted butter or oil in there, and I'm going to cover it with a damp cloth and let this rise for an hour, and we will come back and I'll show you how it looks at that point. It's been an hour. I just got my bread. I put my bread in my oven on my bread proof setting. If you don't have that, it's fine. Just leave it out on your counter. And you want your bread to about double in size. So it's been an hour for me, but it may take a little bit longer depending on how warm it is in your kitchen. If it's warm, the faster your bread will rise. I have a glass bread dish, and I put some butter on the inside, and I'm just going to smear this butter on all of the sides. You want to very well grease your loaf pan, because the last thing you want is to have gone through all of this effort and your bread won't pop out of your loaf pan. So I'm using a generous amount of butter, and I'm just using my hands to feel around the inside of the loaf pan to make sure it is very well greased. You could also use oil or lard if that's what you have. I just like using the butter. I feel like it works very well. So I have my loaf pan fully greased, and I still have some of that butter on my hands, which is actually going to work out well for us when we plop our bread out. So here's my dough. I'm gonna plop it onto my workstation, and I'm gonna press it down. This is also called like punching your bread down. It rose, and now I'm just squeezing all of that air out. I know it sounds counterproductive, but just trust the process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press my loaf into a rectangle shape. And I will show you in just a minute while we do that. every once in a while, what I'm going to do is grab my loaf pan and set it a little bit on top of my dough just for sizing. You want your dough to be a smidge longer than your loaf pan by maybe a couple of finger widths, like the width of your finger, not the length. Just a little bit longer, and I'll show you why. So once you have your dough into a roughly rectangle-ish shape, what you're going to do is, starting from the bottom, lift up with your thumbs and start rolling your loaf up towards the backsplash. So I'm doing this on a counter. So I'm starting at the bottom and rolling up like you're rolling up a roll of paper towels. So I'm just very gently rolling my bread up, and you want your seam, when you're all finished, it's going to be a log shape, and you want your seam to be at the bottom, pressed against the counter. Then to the right and the left, you are going to tuck the ends of your loaf under. So you're going to have the seams from where you rolled the bread up, and then you're going to have the seams from tucking your loaf under. What we're doing is creating surface tension on the top of the loaf. Now I'm gonna grab my loaf pan, carefully lift up my dough and set it into my loaf pan. And your dough is going to look very small in your loaf pan. That's fine, it's going to rise again. So at this point, I'm going to take my moist towel I had over my bowl. I'm going to set it over my loaf pan and allow this to do a second rise for about 45 minutes. And also in that time, I'm going to preheat my oven to 375 degrees. The dough has risen and my oven is preheated. It's risen a good bit and it'll rise a little bit more in the oven. So my oven's on 375 and I am going to pop this in for 35 minutes and I'll show you how you'll know it's done. I got the bread out of the oven. If you want to be able to tell if it's done, you tap on it and it should sound hollow. It cooked for the 35 minutes and I've let it cool for 10 minutes. Now what I'm going to do is grab a butter knife and just run it around the outside of the bread, so in between the bread and the bread pan. And what we're going to do is flip it over onto a wire cooling rack. So I have my cooling rack right here. This is always the moment of truth. Oh, and it came right out. That's the benefit of making sure you grease your pan really well. And I think the loaf came out really great. Mine is a little bit darker than yours maybe, just because I used the hard red wheat. But I hope you think it was as easy as I did. Here she is. It smells really good. I wish we had smell-o-vision. Our whole house smells like freshly made bread. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments what else you want to see. This was a really highly requested recipe, but let me know what are the things you want me to show you how to make in the non-visual Cooking Made Easy series. And until next time, happy homemaking.